Hmm. Hi, I'm Philip Watson. I'm 38 years old. I live in a small town outside of Mexico City in Mexico. I'm Mexican Australian. I was born and raised in Mexico, and my mom is from Mexico. My father is Australian, and I've worked in the music business for many years as a producer, songwriter, a musician, singer, and I'm also a circling facilitator. I facilitate on Circle Anywhere and also in person in English and in Spanish. And my wife Liz is also a circling facilitator, and she's also a singer and an actress. And we have a 2-year-old son called Alexander. I first experienced circling about 6 years ago, and it was a pretty intense relationship from the beginning, I would say. Um, I experienced a weekend of circling led by Jordan, and I didn't really understand much of what had happened, but I knew that I really liked it. And pretty soon after that, Liz and I decided to do the 6-month training. So we went into that with very little experience, but we just had a kind of intuitive sense that this was the way forward for us.
Wow, cool.
I've led a lot of circling. I'd say most of it has been online on Circle Anywhere. Been leading on Circle Anywhere for almost 4 years.
Wow.
And I think it's probably on average about a session a day. So that's been, yeah, over 1,000 hours, I think. And then I've also had the chance to, be an assistant leader on several SASs, several 6-month trainings. And we've also been doing leading in Spanish in Latin America. So Liz and I have led a few weekends here in Mexico. We led a weekend in Colombia. And we also led a few circling workshops at a big conference that happened in Colombia last year. That was the first Hispanic American Integral Conference. And Liz and I were there, and Jordan was there as well. And so we did several circling workshops, which was amazing because we had like 50, 60 people in a workshop. And it was fun. Yeah. Well, one thing I like is it really has made me cultivate presence. Like it's helped me develop the capacity to just be here and to be in my body and to like not run away from this moment in my mind, because that was a strong tendency I had. I've always been very kind of intellectual and also very like imaginative and really enjoying being in my own mind. And I still do that, but it's like circling has helped me be more here, especially when I'm with other people. Um, Another thing I love about circling is that it keeps like showing me. Like it helps me see myself through being seen by others. So, and especially the parts of me that I can't really see, like simply by getting feedback from others of how they're experiencing me or how it is to be with me, I get to see more of myself, meet more of myself. And then another thing I like about circling is that uh, I can get into really fun, trippy states doing this practice. And it's often very similar to like ingesting certain substances. It's like getting high without drugs, basically. Not always, but sometimes it can be really fun. And we get to go into those kinds of states together, which is even more fun. Uh, yeah, there's been several periods when doing this practice has been quite challenging. One that comes to mind now was during one of those weekends of the 6-month training, where I think it was the first time I was really contacting what I call like the snakes in my belly, like parts of me that are quite primal and dark and almost like the opposite of kind. Um, and it was very scary. I had no real experience of those parts of me. And so I just had a stomach ache for days, and I was just kind of in a bad mood, and I didn't really want to be there. And I was just uncomfortable and unhappy, and I didn't really know why. But in the end, that part of me just kind of came out with the whole group. And that ended up leading to me wrestling with another participant and really going into that energy. And it was like incredibly painful, not so much physically, but emotionally really painful. And I would cry, and I kept saying like, I don't want more of this. And nobody was pushing me, but they were like asking me like, are you sure? Like, it seems like there's more there, and like you can stay with it. And I did. And eventually it just became this like sense, like for the first time I really felt at home in my own power and in my body. And I felt this strong, almost like kind of alpha male feeling in me. And yeah, it was amazing. It was completely unexpected. I went from this darkest place to suddenly feeling super comfortable in myself. But the process was pretty difficult, and it was several days actually of being very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I have a few answers.
Yeah.
So I'd say, in general, throughout my life, I've, I don't know if it's luck or it's karma or what, but I have had the chance to meet the teachers that I needed to meet at that time. Like that saying, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. That's been quite true throughout my life. Like when I first started really getting into spiritual practice and meditation and integral theory as well, I I met Terry Patton, who became my first kind of mentor and teacher, and um, developed a friendship with him. And the circumstances that led to that were pretty, unlikely in a way, but it just kind of happened. And that's happened several times for me. And with circling, I would say that the way it developed was with Jordan Mishka Allen. Like first, just meeting him and becoming friends, and then him sharing that he was doing this practice pretty much full time. And so that just piqued my interest because I liked Jordan. I was like, oh, if he likes that practice and I really like him, like, I wonder what that's about. And I think throughout these 5 years or so of doing the practice, Jordan has been a kind of mentor to me. And it's always funny because he's a little bit younger than me. So it's always like, oh, he's kind of like mentor and teacher, and yet he's younger. So it's also helped to break down that kind of maybe bias that I have, that I think many of us have, of like, oh, your mentors have to be older, and like often that's the case, but not necessarily. I think in my case with Jordan, it wasn't like that. Well, and also something I like about this practice and like our Circle Anywhere community is that there's a lot of mentoring going on, I think, constantly, especially between facilitators. So maybe like Jordan has been like my main mentor, but I've learned so much from so many facilitators. And even just from facilitating with them, from leading with them for a while, I see like the way they lead and the places where I could be more like them. And even like the things that trigger me or bother me about other facilitators, when I bring it to them, it tends to be really beautiful and powerful because I get to see how probably it's something that I'm not really owning in myself, or that I could be more like that. One thing that circling has brought me as an individual, I would say, is just a sense of feeling more at home as me. And that's been it's an ongoing process. And I don't, in one sense, I've experienced some of that from the very beginning of doing circling. But at the same time, it feels like it's just coming to fruition, like pretty recently in the last few months. Um, yeah, it's this capacity to like not, I think I'm more able now to not try to be somebody, uh, especially somebody that I imagine others would want me to be. So I can just be whoever I am in the moment, and that's just really, really nice.
Hmm.
Would be when we were on a 7-day circling retreat in Tulum in Mexico. Uh, and my wife Liz and I got into some really deep stuff around, it's like almost like archetypal masculine and feminine energies. And but it was very connected also to what was happening in our relationship. And for me it was it really felt like I was being called to step up and to man up in a way, in the sense of like really take responsibility for myself and and to to stop being more like a boy or a teenager, and really just like be there for her unconditionally. And it was a painful process. We we went into it with the whole group there with us, and Jordan and John and Sean were kind of facilitating it. And it was edgy because there were times where I think all of us were like, I don't know if this relationship is going to survive, because we were both going into our deepest needs and deepest wounds, and like all the ways that we didn't trust each other. And but yeah, for me it really showed me how I think a mature relationship really needed, for me at least, needed me to grow up in a way,
Hmm.
and to uh, also got to see all the ways that I was kind of like projecting my mother onto her and expecting her to take care of me in all these ways. And when some of her deepest longings were actually to be, to be met by a mature masculine energy. She didn't want to be she didn't want me seeing her as my mother. And so I had to grow into that more mature energy. Yeah, another one was, I think the first time that I'd say I was really like sold on this practice, where I really, I think, started to understand the magic and the power in it. And that was during the first weekend of my first 6-month training. So we were in New York, and Liz and I turned up, and we had very little experience with circling. And the first hour or 40 minutes or something, we were all sitting in a big circle with like 35 people. Nobody said anything. There was no like, oh, welcome to the course, blah, blah, blah. It was just like intense, pregnant silence. And then people started, just things started happening that seemed like just chaos to me. And that kind of continued, like essentially I was just feeling more and more and more uncomfortable being there. And that continued for a couple of days, why basically was like, I don't understand what's happening. And I think I was actually very scared and angry, but I wasn't able to say that I was scared and angry. All I knew was I felt uncomfortable, and I was having like flashbacks of being in shamanic ayahuasca ceremonies. Like I was like, what the hell is going on here? And eventually, I think the night of the second night of the training, something happened, and I felt so much anger and so uncomfortable that I had to leave the room. I had to go to the bathroom. And when I came back, like the group's attention was with me, and like, what's happening for you, and they could tell that I was like about to explode, I think, but I have no idea. All I knew was like, oh, I'm really uncomfortable. And eventually I was kind of facilitated into this face-to-face meeting with a woman, another participant, that I realized I was feeling very angry at her, and I was able to share that, and she was just there with me. She didn't get reactive or anything. And eventually it was like something energetically, like it got unlocked or unblocked in my torso, and all this like energy started rushing up and down my spine, and my body was like rocking back and forwards, and I was like in bliss, and I had no idea how it had happened. And I think in retrospect it was like because there was all this energy of fear and anger in my belly that when it got to come forth and be expressed and be met, it actually turned into a kind of like love bliss energy in my body that continued for several days. And so after that happened, I was like, wow, okay, this stuff is powerful. So when I started circling, I was working in the music business, and that had been my life for about 15 years. I started quite early. Like I had a band when I was in high school, and we got signed by Warner Music and made a CD, and we toured, and I had that whole like Almost Famous experience. The band didn't do that well, but I still got to see what the whole business was about. And I fell in love with the recording studio, especially. And so I decided to go to college to study music production and recording engineering. And so that's what I did. I went to the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and then I got a job in New York City producing jingles. And then I moved back to Mexico and started working with a friend who opened a studio, and so we would produce demos, produce music for TV, jingles, whatever work we could get. And we also had a band, and so we would play with our band. And um, then I started also teaching. Like I got a job teaching music production and songwriting at a university. And then I was on the TV show The Voice, like as a participant. And so I did all kinds of things basically in the music business. I was also a touring musician. Like I played in bands for pretty well-known artists in Latin America. And but then around the time that I found circling, I think I was getting really tired of playing music. Like it just wasn't very satisfying anymore. And so it was a pretty natural transition when I started circling, that I played less and less music as I did more and more circling.
Mm.
And now recently in the last few months, it's like I'm rediscovering my love for music, but from a very different place. And I realize now that what was happening for me with music was I had a very strong like a very strong pattern of like, I should be really successful doing this. And I had all these ridiculously high standards for myself, which even if I did meet them sometimes, but I didn't all the time. And so obviously it just wasn't fun anymore. Like it was never good enough. I was never good enough for myself. And what's cool is like through doing so much circling, I've gotten to really see that pattern in me and acknowledge it and see that it comes from my childhood. And it's like it's in a sense it's doing what it thinks is best for me, just trying to help me in its own way, but it's not really that necessary anymore. And so now I'm starting to play music again, and again it's fun because I'm not doing it to fulfill any kind of expectations, just because I like doing it.
Hmm.
One thing I'm excited to share with participants during my sessions. That's the question.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I like pointing to in a session is how fully we can be here in this moment. Like it's almost infinite, the capacity that we have to be present, to be here. And so one way that I like pointing to that is just pointing to sensation and to the body, like what's happening in our body. Can I feel it a little bit more? Can I like, and then even like including emotions, including my sense of like right now that the desk in front of me and the wall and the floor, it's like all of that is happening. I start to notice that all of that is happening in my experience or in my awareness. And so that just, it like just keeps bringing me more and more fully into the moment. And then I can become aware of you, like you're there listening to me, and that's included in my experience as well. So there's this process, it's kind of like guiding myself in a kind of meditation, but I can do that with others and they can come along for the ride with me, where we can just see like how fully can we inhabit this present moment and how it's just like endless. It's like my capacity to be more present and more connected or more in relationship to whatever's here just goes on forever, I think. To notice if you have any shoulds around this practice. With it could be with yourself, like ways that you should be, like, oh, I should understand the principles or the rules of the practice better, or I should practice more, I should do more circling, I should circle every day. Not that there's anything wrong necessarily with any of those, but just noticing them is good, I think. And then, and also if you have shoulds about others or about the circle or about the group, like people should listen to me more, or all of that, I think is really rich territory to notice. Because it, for me, when I notice a should, it's like it points me to where I can love myself more, ultimately. Like if I feel like, oh, I should be showing up more, I can just be with that. And then, and like, oh, how do I know that that's true, that I should be showing up more? Or like, what is it in me that's telling me that I should be showing up more? And do I need to, do I need to believe it? Maybe I don't. And it's like slowly through just noticing those shoulds, we can start to discover more freedom, maybe like more freedom to be all kinds of different ways, and more space to express ourselves in new ways, maybe. So I'd say being on this journey of transformation or growth, I'm pretty aware by now that it's better to have company on that journey. And then at the same time, I have a growing sense of how I can be that company for others. So whatever capacities I've developed in this practice, I can bring them as a kind of service. And when I say that, I think of my 2-year-old son, and I think of the world that I want him to live in, a world that is more truthful and more loving and more real and more authentic than the world we live in now. And doing this practice and sharing whatever capacities I might have, I think contribute, even if it's just like a few drops in the ocean, but they're definitely contributing to creating that world that I would want for him and for all of the future generations. Ooh.